All right, I've got a question for you. Can we measure something exactly? Can we find out its exact measurement? So let's take this red bar here. Could I measure this exactly? Well, if this was something on a piece of paper, I could get my ruler out. In this case, I've got a metric ruler, and each one of these numbers represents 1 centimeter. Right, here's 3 centimeters. So the small lines in between have broken each centimeter down into 10 pieces. So each of those represents a millimeter. So if I was to zoom this up and have a look, I can see my red line kind of stops at about 52 millimeters. So I'm going to say 52 millimeters is the length of my red bar. Now, have I measured it exactly? Well, no, because my ruler has what we call a limit of reading. Okay, it's the smallest unit on our measurement device. I can only measure this to the nearest millimeter. Okay, but it might be somewhere between those millimeters, but I have a limit of reading on my device. So we say in mathematics that the limit of reading is the smallest unit on our device. Now in this case, that is 1 millimeter, because the smallest piece that our measuring device is broken into is a millimeter. Now we have another term in mathematics called the absolute error, and that's just simply one of two options. Usually, like in this case, it's half of that limit of reading. But we say plus or minus, because it could be half above or half down. So in this case, my limit of my absolute error, is half a millimeter, plus half a millimeter or minus half a millimeter. So it could be half a millimeter either side of what I measured. Now in some questions they might tell you the actual value, and then your absolute error will simply be the measured value minus the actual value. But for us, for this exercise, absolute error is half the limit of reading in both directions. So that gives us an upper limit and a lower limit. Now the upper limit is just simply whatever we measure it to be plus our absolute error. So we measured it at 52 millimeters plus our absolute error of half a millimeter means it could be as high as 52.5. We have a lower limit, which is the same thing, but this time we take it away. So it's the absolute error taken away from our measurement. Now that gives us a range that the actual length of that red line sits somewhere between those two numbers. So that just means that no, actually we can't measure something exactly, because nearly every measurement is just an estimate, and it'll be an estimate based on the accuracy of what we're using to measure it with, or our measuring device. In this case, my ruler, and I'm limited by the fact that it only measures to millimeters. Okay, so I know it sits somewhere between those two. It's more than 51.5. It's less than 52.5, and I can see that visually. If I look up here, it's 51.5 would be somewhere here, 52.5 here. It definitely sits between those. But the actual value, if I was to measure it down to some ridiculous amount of decimals like this, it could be this. It could be this small, right? Down to this decimal place. I don't know. I've only got a ruler that tells me it's somewhere between 51.5 and 52.5. Not exact, but it's pretty close. All right, well done.